Jodi.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to move my screen so I don't see myself and I get to see you a little bit because you're more interesting to me. First of all, this is great to be coming on and speaking with all of you amazing people, all of the speakers and all of the listeners. And yeah, I'm going to be speaking a little bit about transition. So about 5 years ago, I had an earth-shattering experience. It wasn't so earth-shattering, actually. It was more wrist-shattering. I broke my wrist. I really don't recommend that to anyone who is a studying, working mother of 5. It's not really very, very helpful. But you may be wondering how I broke my wrist and actually why I'm even telling you this story. So one sunny Hanukkah vacation day, I decided that it would be a great idea to take my then 2 over 16-year-old children on a Segway tour of Tel Aviv. We had an amazing time until, in the last 2 minutes of the Segway tour, I very gently and eloquently and gracefully tapped my Segway onto a curb and very gracefully and gently smashed into the ground, wrist first. So that became quite the segue into the next 6 weeks that were very, very different for me, a very different type of existing. It wasn't fun at all. But what it did do is it taught me a lot about being adaptable and being vulnerable, and also about being courageous, especially when I had to use the public bus system. That wasn't so much fun. So according to the Webster Dictionary, the word segue, which is spelled for real, S-E-G-U-E, it means to make a transition without interruption from one activity, topic, scene, or part to another. So basically, segue is a graceful transition, a transition with no hitches, no hiccups. Personally, I don't do segue. I do more transition. Transition actually gives all of us a lot more permission, like Hannah was talking about. It gives us a lot more permission, a lot more understanding, and it's accepting of all the bumps and the curbs in the road. So as a Dati Leumi couples and sex therapist, the idea of transition comes up a lot. It's not always comfortable and can bring up a lot of stuff for couples. Transition, which sounds a lot like tradition, may make you break out into song, may make you think of Fiddler on the Roof and Tevye. And what I found really, really interesting is that in Fiddler on the Roof, which is one of the Jewish religion's most popular films, the concept of tradition and the idea of transition are basically inseparable. Throughout this film, we follow Tevye and Golda and all of their daughters and Yentl and Mutl and all of the community negotiate love and relationships. And love and relationships introduce excitement, wonder of wonders, miracle of miracles, and of course, the tension and vulnerability that consistently accompany the unknown. In the movie, as in real life, transitions create a sense of vulnerability and dis-ease. And some of the speakers that came before me talked about this vulnerability and dis-ease that we feel when we're working with the laws of Taharat HaMishpacha and the idea of going to the Mikveh. So Joseph Stein, who is the playwright, he offers us comfort. In these scenes of tremendous vulnerability and transition, he introduces musical numbers about tradition. I don't even think I have to say that word. I think we can all sing it together. You may notice that I use the word negotiate to describe how we handle transition. And that's because transition compels us to negotiate between the familiar and somewhat safe place where we are in the present and our goal, the unknown and unpredictable but desired place that we actually want to get to. There's a tension in transition. And this tension is like a tightrope. If I was a little bit more technically savvy, I would have like a picture of a tightrope and someone balancing on it pop up on your screen. But this tightrope, right, it's anchored on either end. It's anchored in the security of the present on one end and our dreams and our goals for our future on the other end. And the tension is what keeps us focused. If the tightrope is not taut, if it's not tense, it's going to be ineffective. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that tension can be good sometimes. Transition is the vulnerability we need to be in order to move forward. Let's think about what it means to be vulnerable. Most people associate vulnerability with weakness. In fact, when you try to translate the word vulnerability into Hebrew, you're going to hit a brick wall. And believe me, I've tried many, many times. I've asked a lot of people. And what people come up with are two different words. One word is chasuf or chasufa, right? To be exposed or to be exposed to. And the second word is pgia or pagia, which means to be susceptible. And while both of these words actually are accurate to a certain degree, they're still lacking. When what they're lacking, I believe, and what Brene Brown, if anyone has heard of Brene Brown or heard her TED Talks or read any of her books, she brings up this idea of the beauty and the possibility that comes with vulnerability. And we, like the Lion and the Wizard of Oz, we have to be vulnerable in order to be courageous. We must be vulnerable to successfully transition from point A to point B. And that's sort of when I was listening to Yael talk about, I loved what she said about, vulnerability is being in the raw, unformed potential. I thought that was I was like, oh my gosh, write that down. This really, really connects. And Chana actually talked about listening to our inner voice, right? And giving ourselves permission to be in that vulnerability. So let's go for a second to tradition. Tradition is here to help us, like in the movie, with the discomforts that come with vulnerability. Mikveh is a place of transition. Thus, it's a place of vulnerability. We transition from one halachic status to another, like Nechama talked about, from one relational status to another. And this process of preparing for the mikveh, of submerging and emerging out of the water, that's also what cool words are being used here tonight. We're merging, right? We're either submerging or we're emerging into and out of the water. And that process gives us such an incredible opportunity to take time to appreciate being in the transition and not rushing through it, experiencing the process. We don't often have this opportunity in our day-to-day lives, right? When we're in our car, that's usually our transitional mode. We're running, from home to work, to pick up, to drop off, to the supermarket, to visits, right? When we're in these transitional spaces, our brains are busy with so many different things. And usually we're also on the phone and talking to this, right? We don't give ourselves time to actually be in transition. I actually find it really interesting because I miss being in the car now. I realize that when I'm in the car, with the lockdown, which is now starting to open up, all of a sudden I have some space to breathe because I have to stop what I'm doing and not just go on the next Zoom link, but I have to get in the car, turn the car on and take a few minutes and just relax. And I'm loving it. That's where I make all my good phone calls and do my good thinking. So the mikvah here is also an opportunity to stop and to breathe and to be in transition. Our tradition, our Masorah, our halachic guidelines, wait for it, they're our transitional space. They're our transitional objects, Our transitional objects are, we can think about it in terms of being kids. A transitional object is like a blanket, a pacifier, a teddy bear, right? If we're thinking about in adult terms, we may be talking about taking your favorite pajamas to wear when you move out of your parents' home for the first time, or the Tehillim you were given as a bat mitzvah gift from your favorite teacher that you use as you walk down the aisle at your wedding. True story. It could be a special necklace or bracelet a loved one gives you to wear, hoping that you'll think of them when they're not around. True story. Think about your experiences with Taharat HaMishpacha and the monthly cycle of transitions that we as women are so familiar with it. We've been talking a lot about this tonight, and with your permission, I'd like to take us somewhere new. But first, we will have to take a deep breath together and allow ourselves to transition into a new space. This space is called relationality. It's a funny word. It's a real one. And it's actually used in therapy very often. You could check out Terry Real's RLT model. It's called Relational Life Therapy, and he uses this word a lot. And I really, really, I love it. I invite you to think about your relationships with yourself, with your spouse, your soon-to-be spouse. Some of you may be remembering your spouse or dreaming of the spouse you will, Bezrat Hashem, meet. And I'm speaking to all of you together as women. I invite you to think about your relationship with Judaism, with Taharat HaMishpacha, with Mikveh, with your bodies. Going to the Mikveh is one of Judaism's top traditions. We're guided by halacha and Masorah. Together, they hold our hands as we enter into this transitional space. In my work, I have the honor of meeting with many men and many women who share their feelings about Taharat, HaMishpacha, and Mikveh. The concepts of vulnerability, uncertainty, opportunity, courage, exposure, beauty, fear, anticipation, they all come up. Of course they do. Mikveh is a transitional space and things come up in transitional spaces. Going home from the mikveh is a transition as well. What are our expectations? What are our husband's expectations? Do they line up? Have we taken the time to share our thoughts and our feelings as we transition from one relational status to another? We're tasked with attending to all of these things. And I loved how, Danielle, you just gave me the perfect segue into this when you spoke about this questionnaire that you put out, because we need to reach out. So many times we feel mikveh is secret. It's not, it's private. Private is very different than secret. We can ask in comfortable ways. We can ask people, we can get advice, we can get suggestions, we can gain comfort and belonging. We can reach out. Sometimes we reach out to our spouse or a friend, a kala teacher, a rav, yotzet halacha. Maybe you have a great relationship with the mikveh lady, the balanit, who's going to be speaking to us next, right? And maybe you need to speak to someone professionally. Maybe that's what you need. All of these things can be good. They can be okay. They're healthy and productive. It's no wonder that transition and tradition go hand in hand. I like to believe that tradition is Hashem's way of walking us through the changes we go through in our lives. Tradition is our transitional object. We can always count on tradition to be there to help stabilize us on that tightrope we so often walk, suspending us between where we are now and where we want to go. So the next time you think of coming up with a smooth segue into a new conversation, a new job, a new relationship, a new month, a new mindset, remember, segues are not always as seamless and graceful as they seem on TV. They're actually a lot more pointy, like the rooftops with shaky fiddlers. There are bumps and curves and falls and broken bones in real life. But if we listen closely and hold on tight to our traditions, we can hear the beautiful music of the fiddlers as we negotiate our transitions.